All right, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. Uh, on the road today, very busy, but I was thinking about this, and obviously, this video is inspired by BDA's interview that he did with Dr. 805, who was a regular caller to their show. And he talked about Errol Spence's condition after the car accident and how possibly his lifestyle also contributed to the current condition that he believes that Errol Spence may be suffering from some type of neurological injury. And obviously we've seen the slurred speech, or heard the slurred speech, I should say. We kind of seen that glassy look in his eyes. And I've said this and suspected this, that he just hasn't looked right uh, for a long time now. So shout out to BDA and shout out to Dr. 805 for kind of elaborating and explaining, you know, what they believe, or at least what Dr. 805 believes, is a neurological issue that Errol Spence has suffered as a result of that car accident, and also his lifestyle um, could have contributed and possibly exacerbated the condition that Dr. 805 believes that he has. So I did some research myself, and obviously I'm not a doctor, but once again, we could have our opinions. We still have the ability to do research to try to understand things and educate ourselves on a lot of things. And there is this condition called dysarthria, and it can happen and occur as a result of certain diseases like cerebral palsy, Lyme disease, but also it happens when the brain is injured due to trauma. And damage to the cerebellum, which is that little ball in the back of your brain. You have the brain, then you have that little ball that's attached to the brain, and it's attached to the brain stem, which basically is responsible for coordination, movement, balance, and also can affect speech. When that is damaged, that could also cause dysarthria. It could also cause, uh, you know, coordination problems, balance problems, movement problems. And that was also brought up and kind of observed. People came to that conclusion. They were saying, what was wrong with Spence? He looked flat. He looked off balance. Didn't look like his movement was there. His reflexes was there, and that could be a result of damage to the cerebellum, right? So, a lot of times when you see a fighter get hit hard, their legs go. That's because that, you know, it could be because of the cerebellum, being dislodged from the brainstem, or being moved around in the back there and causing that jolt and that movement from the brainstem. And also, over time, there could be lesions on the cerebellum too. That's why sometimes you'll see a fighter not walk the same. A lot of times you'll see a fighter walk differently after retirement, talk differently after retirement, just move slower, talk slower, slur speech. So this is something to really think about. And I posted the interview that BDA Boxing had with Dr. 805, and I also posted an interview that Spence did in his younger days, and a most recent interview that he did leading up to this fight. And you can clearly see there's a difference in speech patterns, speech speed. You can clearly see that there's a difference in his eyes. His eyes look much more glassy now. They look different, right? So to me, something is wrong. I do think, and I suspect, and again, it's just my opinion, that there is some type of neurological damage that has occurred as a result of, you know, the car accident. I think, the hard living, just being in the gym over the years, and I just think something is wrong. I think there is some type of neurological damage, and I think it has been exasperated by Errol Spence boxing, by Errol Spence's lifestyle. And another thing too, that Dr. 805 mentioned, and we've all talked about this, is Errol Spence um having such problems making weight and getting really heavy in between fights. And you can even look at that interview, uh or actually one of the interviews that I've seen, I think it was leading up to the Kell Brook fight back in 2017, when they, he was being asked about Kell Brook being bigger than him because he went all the way up to 160 and fought Golovkin. And he said, "I'm a big guy too. I'm walking around in the 170s, 170, 175. So I'm a big guy too." And this was back in like 2017. He's saying this. So if he's walking around at 175 pounds back in 2017, what is he walking around at now? So getting back to what Dr. 805 said, and we've talked about this before, is when you dehydrate yourself and you try to, and you have that process of rehydrating yourself, the last part of your body to get rehydrated is the brain, right? And we talked about like when you're dehydrated, how there's a lack of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain that cushions the brain and protects the brain, from damage. When you suffer from trauma, when that liquid in the brain is gone, there's nothing to cushion the brain when it's when you're getting hit, right? So these are all things to look at and consider, right? And JC, that's a great point. So remember when the doctor jumped in the ring? Yeah, I remember when the doctor jumped in the ring. And it was weird when he jumped in the ring, and Dr. 805 mentioned this, and he's like, the doctor didn't even put a light to look at his pupils. And I think Jimmy said this as well during the discussion, that there was no light to look at the pupils in his eyes to see if there was any issues going on there. So I'm just gonna have to be honest, based off of what I've seen and just from the behavior over the years of Errol Spence, the speech, just the movement, the mannerisms, something is wrong. And in my opinion, I don't think Errol Spence should ever fight again. I think he should retire. I don't care who he fights. He runs the risk of causing more damage to himself if he decides to continue boxing. That's just my opinion. And it's funny too. It's not funny, but it's if you look back to Gerald McClellan, right, when he fought Nigel Benn, everyone assumes, or I can't say everyone, but I would venture to say most people suspect that that was just because of what happened in that Nigel Benn fight. But if you go back and you hear Gerald McClellan talk about how hard it was for him to make 160, he was saying he was walking around at 180. And he even said that after the second Julian Jackson fight that he was suffering from headaches. So again, was there underlying issues that even Gerald McClellan was going through, because he was, living a hard life, getting so heavy in between fights and having to dehydrate himself down so much, and never probably fully comfortably rehydrating that brain properly, and as a result of that, getting hit in the head and having less and less cushion there over the years of trying to make that weight. Obviously, I would suspect that was a contributing factor for him being somewhat compromised even going into that Nigel Benn fight. So Nigel Benn pretty much pushed Gerald McClellan over the edge in that fight. But you can argue fight after fight after fight, he was getting closer and closer to that edge. And as a result of that hard living and trying to make weight and walking around at 180 and having to lose 20 pounds every camp, that takes a lot out of a fighter, puts a lot of wear and tear on the body. And Gerald McClellan was doing this into his 30s, right? just like Errol Spence is entering, he's in his 30s. He's 33, going into his mid 30s here. So, I think that there's a problem here. I think that if people are being honest, people in his camp, people around him, promoters, anyone involved in Errol Spence's career, they really have to take a look at Errol Spence, get him checked out, and really, get some neurological exams done. Really look at this man to see if there is any serious issues, because I believe that there is some issues. How serious they are, how far along he is with these injuries, or how far along he is with these issues, neurological issues. Only an examination can tell. And I know it sounds like we're taking away from Terrence Crawford here, but a question was asked during that interview with Dr. 805. BDA asked him, do you think the fight would have been any different if Errol Spence was not damaged going into this fight, or at least in his opinion, neurologically damaged going into this fight? And I agree with him. I do think he was somewhat compromised going into this fight. And he asked, would the fight have been any different? And in his opinion, he says there's no way of knowing. But I'll give you my opinion. And I've been consistent on this, because if you go back all the way to 2018, I always picked Crawford to win this fight, right? I always thought he would win this fight. I always thought that he was just a better fighter. And I always predicted him to win by knockout. But what I do want to make a comparison to, and kind of explain how I thought the fight would play out, I thought it would play out pretty similar to how Crawford's fight with Porter played out, where if you looked at that fight after the first 6 rounds, most people had that fight either Porter up 4-2 or even. But where the fight started to turn was in the second half, going into the 7th round. That's where Crawford started to pull away, and he won 7, 8, and 9, and we all saw what happened in the 10th. So in my opinion, I suspected, and always suspected, that, with Crawford going into a Spence fight, I always thought that the fight would play out similar to how that Porter fight played out in terms of competitiveness in the first half, but then the second half, Crawford just pulling away. So in my opinion, that's how I always envisioned the fight going, and that's how I thought it would play out on Saturday. Even with me suspecting that there were some issues with Spence, I just wasn't sure how far along they were. But to me, on Saturday, it looks like they've gotten worse. They have worsened to a point, and I think they will continue to get worse if he continues to fight. So I still think Crawford would have won, and as much as it sounds like I'm taking away from the victory, I'm not trying to do that intentionally. I'm just giving my objective opinion here. I do think there's something wrong with Errol Spence neurologically. I do think he may be suffering from dysarthria. I do think that there may be some type of brain injury that he suffered from the car crash. I do think the hard living definitely had, also contributed to him not being 100%, or not being what he could have been, in my opinion. I always thought that the longer this fight, took to get made, it was worse for Errol Spence, because he spent his whole career at 147. He was always heavy at 147. And as an amateur, the welterweight limit's 150 to play with. But obviously in the pros, it's 147. So I always thought the longer it took to make this fight, the worse it was going to be for Errol Spence, because it was going to tax his body a lot worse than it would tax Terrence Crawford, because Terrence Crawford obviously was not a career welterweight where Errol Spence was. It always was. So that was always going to factor in my opinion. I always thought that would somewhat compromise him. But then you look at all these other issues with the alcohol problems and the hard living outside the ring. And yeah, yeah. So it just made the fight a lot less competitive, in my opinion. I always thought that Crawford would win, so I'm not going to take that away from Crawford. Like I said, I always thought he was the better fighter. That was never going to change. I always thought he was more talented. I always thought he was quicker. I thought he was more explosive. I thought he was more versatile. I always thought he was the better fighter. But I can't just say that Spence's current condition, in my opinion, being somewhat neurologically compromised, I have to say that I do believe that it did play a factor in the fight. I don't think the fight would have been as one-sided if the fight happened earlier in Spence's career. If this fight happened before the car accident, if this fight happened, late 2018, early 2019, before the car accident, I do believe it would have been more competitive. I do think the end result would have been the same. I do think it would have played out very similar to the Porter fight, where, like I said, it was going to be nip and tuck, competitive for the first half of the fight. But I always thought that Crawford would pull away in the end, like he's done in many of his fights, like he did against Jose Benavidez. He pulled away in that fight second half. I mean, that fight wasn't really incredibly competitive, but it was more competitive early on in the first half than it was in the second half. So no, it's not confirmed. This is just my opinion. And again, I put links to videos in there. I'm not going to play the interviews, because again, you never know what YouTube's going to do. I trust BDA probably wouldn't have done anything if I played clips of there. But again, I put links to BDA's interview with Dr. 805. I put links to the interviews. You can compare Spence early in his career being interviewed and being interviewed now, and you can clearly see there's a difference. So I still think Bud would have won regardless, but I don't think it would have been as one-sided. And again, also too, this was always going to be an issue for Spence, I believe, delaying this fight, because it was going to always put more wear and tear and be more taxing on his body, trying to squeeze down to 147. So that was always going to be a problem. The longer it took to make this fight, it was always going to be worse for Spence, in my opinion, because of the difficulty making weight. And you can argue that Crawford is having difficulty, or starting to have difficulty making 147. But if you look at Crawford and you look at Spence, you got one guy who probably walks around at 160 in Terrence Crawford. And then you got another guy, Errol Spence, who's walking around closer to 175, 180. So we have to admit, it's pretty obvious that it's a much more difficult cut for Errol Spence than it is for Terrence Crawford. And I do believe that Terrence Crawford will move up to 154 next. But I do think that Errol Spence, people close to him, need to sit him down and really strongly consider retirement here. That's just my opinion, and I'm probably going to get a lot of backlash for this. Oh, B, you're making well, I'm just making an observation. I can't sit here in good faith and look at Errol Spence. And I said it leading up to the fight. I said that he does not look right. He does not look right. I said that. I said that even when he rehydrated, he looked flat. I said, this looks like it was probably the worst weight cut in his whole career. And Errol Spence is a great guy. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to see anything bad happen to Errol Spence. I want this guy to go on, live a good life with his kids. I mean, he seems like a great father, great person. I don't know the guy personally. I don't know Crawford personally, but it's hard, based off of what I've seen of both guys, to not admire them, not respect them, not like them. They seem like two great human beings, great fathers, great family men, great people all around. So, yeah, this is nothing. This is not me, you know, trying to disparage Errol Spence. I mean, this is just me. I'm, I'm, I'm trying to, show the guy some compassion. I like the guy a lot. I think he's a great guy. He seems like a great guy, great person. I like Terrence Crawford a lot. But at the end of the day, right, we got to look past the money here. We got to look past the money, and we just got to look at the guy's health. And you have to ask yourself if that's your best friend or if that's your brother, right? And you care about a guy, you're in his close circle, and he's close to you, and you're being objective. Would you tell that man to continue fighting? Would you do that? Because I would. I could not, in good conscience and good faith, tell Errol tell Errol Spence that he should continue to fight. I don't think I don't think he should fight, in my opinion. But if I was close to him, I would do everything in my power to try to convince him not to fight again, whether it be his friends, family, dad, whatever. Right? I don't care how bad he says I want to return, and he's saying he wants to return in December. He wants to return in December, right? Which is like 4 or 5 months away. He wants to return in December. After that, nah, nah, he can't return, man. He can't return. And people are saying, oh well, he should fight Thurman, and he shouldn't fight anybody, bro. Not in this condition. It's only gonna get worse. It is only gonna get worse. Then I'm hearing people like Sean Porter. Oh well, he could he could beat he could beat Terrence Crawford. No, man, stop the bullshit. Then this is another thing I hate. You got people like Sean Porter, and again, I respect Sean Porter, but I think I don't think he's being intellectually honest here. He knows Errol Spence could never beat Terrence Crawford. I believe deep down inside he always knew that. But because he has a friendship with both guys, he likes both guys. He's a PBC guy. He was trying to play both sides here. He was trying to pretend to be. But yeah, I just don't agree. I don't think he's being intellectually honest. Anyone honestly, after seeing that and hearing Errol Spence talk and just looking at him from a physical standpoint, anyone who thinks that he could beat Terrence Crawford even at 154, they're not telling the truth, guys. I'm sorry, I don't believe them. I don't believe them. I honestly don't believe anyone who's going to sit there and say that they think that Errol Spence could beat Terrence Crawford in a rematch. I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it. So yeah, shout out to BDA. I thought he did a great job. Shout out to Dr. 805. I thought that was a great discussion. And again, he's the doctor, so he's saying that it could be early signs of dementia. He could be right, but I also think that it could be you know dysarthria. I think it could be dysarthria. I do think it could be that. I do think that there could be some damage to the cerebellum because again, when you hit your head on like that, uh, you know, you're jarring your skull, and you could create some lesions in that cerebellum area. You could dislodge that. You can knock that cerebellum out of place because you see it when guys get hit, how their legs just go, and that's from the brainstem and that cerebellum being jarred. Because that's where the coordination comes from, and that's where a lot of the motor skills, and it affects speech as well, right? So I think he suffers from dysarthria, right? That's what I think. If you guys want to research that, you can Google that and kind of look further into that. But that's just my opinion. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, uh, and I respect what Dr. 805 says, and I'm not saying he's wrong, but I think it could be more or less of an injury to the cerebellum, which is the coordination and the movement, and it affects the speech as well. So yeah, I do think that he's been injured neurologically. I do believe that. And I do think if he continues to fight, he can exacerbate that injury and become worse over time. And I just think it's time to hang him up. I just think it's time to hang him up. This is my opinion. I got to be honest. And this video is probably going to rub some people the wrong way. They're not going to, they don't want to hear they don't want to hear this, and they don't want to even think that this could be, that this could be this could be possible here, right? They don't want to believe that this could be possible. They may be in denial here, but all you got to do is just look at Errol Spence from 2017, 2018, and look at him now, and listen to him talk. Look at his eyes. Just look at the movement. Look at everything about him. It is different. He's compromised, man. And I say that respectfully, man. I say that respectfully. So shout out to Errol Spence. I hope he retires. I hope he makes the right decision. I hope his family urges him to retire, because you go up to 154, you get more fights. Crawford's going up to 154. At the end of the day, a guy like Errol Spence, who has a lot of pride, who fights for a purpose, who wants to be the best. All right, obviously, all fighters fight for money, but there is a pride that Errol Spence has. I believe, I would assume that he wants to be the best. So you go up to 154, you have a couple fights, but you're still going to at some point have to see Terrence Crawford again, and that's somebody you don't want to see again. That's somebody you don't want to see again. So do you want to go up there, fight guys like Keith Thurman or whatever? Who knows? I mean, even Keith Thurman, who knows what Keith Thurman could do with this version of Errol Spence, right? Who knows? Why risk it? Why risk it? I'm sure he's got enough money. I'm sure he doesn't have to fight for the money. This is my opinion. I don't think he. I don't think he has to fight for the money anymore. I don't know for sure, but I don't think he has to fight for the money for sure. So at the end of the day, I do think Errol Spence should retire. He should walk away. All right, guys. That's all I got for now, man. Thank you so much for tuning in. I had to make this video on the road. Very busy today. Couldn't make it in the studio. On the road getting things done here. But take care, everybody. Make sure you check out the roundtable this Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking about this again with the panel. But congratulations to Terrence Crawford. Believe me, my man, I'm not trying to take away from your victory here. I still think, regardless, you would have won anyways. And I have video footage all the way dating back to 2018, when I've been on many shows, many panels, where I've always picked you to win. So this is not any shade on you. Believe me, my brother, this is not any shade on you. And this is no disrespect to you, Errol Spence. This is coming from a place of love. I like you, man. I don't want to see you get hurt. That's it. I don't want to see you get hurt. All right, so peace out to everybody. Take care, man. Be safe.